Hello, welcome to Morning Talk Show. If you are a subscriber to the channel, you may have noticed that there's been a big break here between episodes. I got extremely busy with life, full-time work, and 3 small kids, and trying to keep a little bit of a music career going. But the podcast was always in the back of my mind, and today's episode is one I recorded in the midst of this period of low energy that I was trying to push through, and I got to talk with Matt from the Common Toad podcast. So I just really needed to talk to somebody, and Matt is kind of I think of him as my spiritual brother or something in podcast world, because he's the guy who seems to want and get the same guests that I have. So he's got great conversations with Malcolm Geit and Mark Vernon and some other people, including Martin Shaw, that I haven't talked to yet and really want to talk to. So he's kind of an interesting guy. And I thought this would be kind of an interesting conversation because he and I are somewhat comparable in terms of our online presence. We both have relatively niche podcasts about the human condition and spirituality and to some degree psychology and mythology, but all from like a very layperson standpoint, conversation based. So I thought it would be interesting to pick his brain. We're also very similar in a lot of our spiritual and religious thinking, which is kind of like this sort of Christianity. We get into that. Well, not sort of Christianity. It is Christianity, but he doesn't come from this same evangelical conservative background that I do. We're kind of in the same place, but from completely different paths. So I really enjoyed this conversation when we talk about that kind of stuff, and it's probably a little more casual and friend to friend style. So it was a really nice one for me to do during this period where my energy level was very low. So please like and subscribe. I've got more videos and interviews coming up that I'm excited about. So I'm hoping this will be kind of phase 2 of the podcast. So thanks for watching. And here's Matt from the Common Toad. Go over to his channel too. He's got a YouTube channel as well, and subscribe and check out his episodes. All right. Thanks for watching.
To see you.
Nice to see you too. I just started the recording at a random time, but
okay.
That's awesome that you're doing this outside.
Yeah, it's a little cold in New England, but I figure it's time to get used to it. You know,
what is the temperature?
I don't know. It's in the 40s or something. I don't know how cold it actually is.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But that's Fahrenheit.
Right, exactly. So we're probably about the same at night here. Yeah, we're in Canada, in Edmonton. So getting used to it. I prefer the cold. That's where
Me too.
I can't dress for the summer. I feel like I'm wearing a costume all summer. Like whenever I have to wear shorts and flip-flops is just never going to happen. Like sandals and flip-flops. I don't know what it is. Something in me just rejects them like a disease or something. But
well, I'd make fun of you, Aaron, but I'm the same way, so I guess I won't.
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate you talking to me today. This is the Common Toad. This is Matt from the Common Toad. If the few people who may be paying attention to my podcast at all will have noticed that I really fell off on recording any conversations, and I thought, man, I just want to get back into it. I want to talk to somebody. I want to talk to somebody interesting. I don't really, I don't have any highfalutin, super famous people lined up, but I've always wanted to have a conversation with you. So I thought it would be a good way to get back in. Now that sounds like an insult. You're very highfalutin, but
I don't falut that high.
You don't falut. No, I don't falut much myself.
I fly pretty low to the ground, I have to say.
Yeah, me too. So you have a great podcast, and
Thank you.
called The Common Toad. And you have a habit of talking to my favorite people somehow without, you and I don't consult with each other, but anytime somebody gets added to my list of people to talk to, I go on and it seems you've talked to them. I mean, specifically Mark Vernon you talked to, and Malcolm Geit, and Martin Shaw. That's the one I still want to get at some point, now that I'm officially just copying you.
All those interesting Brits out there.
Yeah, that's definitely a bias I have somehow. I don't look for it. It's like I'm always looking for interesting new people, and then it so happens they have a particular accent often when I find them. But
Yeah.
I'm also a huge John Vervaeke fan, and he couldn't be much less British, I guess, in a lot of ways.
True.
But when I came across your podcast, and I just started sending some messages back and forth with you. The thing that blew my mind was that you brought up George MacDonald in our conversation, which I'm sure in the circles that you're running in, if you run in circles, it seemed like a totally logical thing. But I had just, since childhood, nobody had brought up George MacDonald to me at all. And I felt like, I was just on this sort of solitary spiritual journey. And then, so that kind of really blew my mind. And when I was watching your podcast more, listening to you talk, seeing your tweets, and that kind of thing. And I felt this weird, I feel this weird kinship and love for you, as I hope that's not too weird to say. Maybe it's all fiction, maybe you're a jerk. But I highly doubt it. There's just something, it struck me as interesting. There's not many people I come across on the internet who seem to be kind of picking at the same thread in some ways. And yet I feel like we're alike in a lot of ways, but we're very different in a lot of ways. You're sitting there smoking a pipe, and I'm fascinated by the ways that you and I are similar, and the ways that we're different. And so I guess this will be more of an autobiographical episode than I normally do, although I'm always very autobiographical in my contributions to my podcast. But I feel like there's something that we're kind of grasping at, and that you and I are kind of grasping at, and kind of in a way flailing at, but then in another way kind of patiently seeking, something to do with what human beings are, and something to do with the Christian, the history of Christianity and the Christian tradition, something to do with the imagination, something to do with the Christian imagination, something to do with stories and narrative. And I think it's more than just me and you. I think there's a lot of people out there who are kind of grasping and flailing because there's not a great language. There's not a great bridging language between maybe Christianity as it is portrayed in the media, and Christianity in the majority of Christian writing, and then what's going on now, which is, nothing is new. And I'm sorry this is so wordy, and I'm obviously rusty at this whole podcast game, but it seems to me that there's a bunch of people, maybe you and me included, who are it's dawning on us that the Christian tradition and Christian history and Christian language is grasping at something beyond Christianity. It's something that's just universal and true, something that's very appealing, and that this, even just the search for it, is appealing. Is any of this landing with you?
Yeah, well, maybe one of the things that the internet does, for better or worse, is that it's kind of it allows people who thought that they were kind of on their own, through some of their
Yeah.
through their inner lives and growing up, being kind of just interested in strange ways to things, and and trying to find meaning in a way, having a feeling that, I don't know, that there was just something, to borrow the a phrase used by Malcolm Guyton in one of his recent books, that lifting the veil was just, trying to figure out exactly how, uh, just this feeling that there's something just around the corner, or just over the bend, or just behind something. And if you could only find it, you know, if you could only find it, or say the right words, or do the right ritual, or whatever, you could kind of peek under there, or over the tree line, or whatever, whatever metaphor you want to use. And of course, that this is not in any sense uh, a unique journey, or a unique intuition, or a unique sensibility. It's something that a bunch of people have, but you don't. It's harder to know that when you're just kind of living in your own community, maybe feeling awkward about talking about it, or just, it's some of these conversations that come up. It's not like talking about the weather necessarily, when somebody comes into, a store, or passes you on the street, or you're sitting on a bus or something. You don't necessarily, although I do like the people who just wear their hearts on their sleeves and get right into it. You say hi, and in 5 seconds, you know that their 20-year-old son's not talking to them, and they just cheated on their husband or
Yeah, there
something.
is something. There is something about that. It does a lot of the work for you.
Yeah, but that's not. So I always kind of prefer to like listen to people as opposed to talk. You know,
Yeah.
maybe that's why I like to do podcasts. But yeah. So anyway, I mean, that's the first thing that I thought when you said that there's something about, obviously, the internet, which allows people to, in a more roundabout way or indirect way, come across other people who might be thinking along similar lines, that they wouldn't necessarily find, at least as easily or as early on in life, you know, before the your confidence kicks in, or your sort of don't give a fuck kind of sensibility gets in when you become a much older person, maybe later in life. So that's something that has happened. Like I said, it's certainly fashionable to, and I feel it myself, just to talk about how terrible technology is, and how terrible the world is going, and we're all headed towards some you know technological precipice.
Yeah.
And for all I can tell, we probably we probably are. But
Could be.
all these things have their ups and their downs, their pluses and minuses. So I guess
Yeah.
that is one of the good things. Um,
Totally. I'm always. I don't know if I'm jealous or judgmental of how people tend to live in just one world. Like there's only, this technology is either a terrible thing that's tearing us apart, or it's an amazing thing that's enabling me to feel a great affection for someone across the continent. It's both things. Obviously, it's got to be both things. And I like the idea of redeeming these kind of technologies, and using them in this way. I mean, which is probably why I'll never be, famous or whatever. Not that it's not a good goal anyway, but yeah, it's just when you try and do these things with real feeling and nuance, they don't tend to jump to the top of the algorithm. But yeah, no, it's interesting. I liked a bunch of what you said. There were a bunch of jumping off places there. And you talked about, like, you tend to like to listen to people, and that's why you podcast. And I think that we've come across the first difference between the two of us, which is that my podcast was really an attempt to discipline myself to be a better listener. I asked a guy, prominent flat earth guy, to talk to me on my podcast that didn't exist. He said yes. And I thought, man, I cannot sit here and jabber my head off at this person because they've agreed to be on here. So that was just sort of, and then John Vervaeke was my second guest, I think, and Paul Vanderklay. And so these were like earlier on in their in their internet. Like they had way fewer subscribers and all that. But I just was like, oh my goodness, I gotta, I've really got to listen to these people, and they're fascinating. Everyone who's been on the podcast, and then I've realized since taking this big unintentional break from my podcast that it became a spiritual discipline or a spiritual outlet. It became a very soul filling thing, and every time I would come up from a conversation, pretty much without fail, I felt just more myself or something. I just felt more centered and kind of that feeling of coming out of a reverie or something. So have you experienced that with your podcast? Like, how do you feel afterwards usually?
Well, usually, usually I feel better than when I start. Usually feel better having come out of it than when I go into it. When I go into it, I feel like, well, this person's being generous with their time, and who the hell am I? And why they say that they'll talk to me, and then I think, well, buck up a little bit for Christ's sake,
Yeah,
I
can
know how to have
relate
a
to that.
conversation at least, but and it usually goes just fine. I do a lot of note taking before it so that I have plenty of things to talk about in
Yep.
case conversation ever lulls. But the fact of the matter is that these people that I've talked to so far, who've been so generous with their time, really are just kind of interesting naturally. So there's not that much of a problem as far as it goes. And I do, I direct the conversation by asking
Yeah.
questions, but they take it wherever they want to go. But yeah, I mean, I do. I usually feel a kind of accomplishment and exhilaration, but it's similar. It's similar and it's different. I mean, when I didn't have a podcast, the thing that I really liked about all this sort of thing is that is the conversations themselves. Like that's kind of outside of my personal life, which has, I have a wife and kids, and I have things that matter to me more than anything. But in terms of what you know, as as an individual, what I live for when I'm being just a person walking around the world is I kind of just live for like a good conversation, whatever it may be. I mean, an anecdote, a good joke, a character, being able to go back and forth with somebody kind of in a friendly way, whether there's some kind of, like ball busting character, or whether they are like the sort of people that I alluded to before that will just simply spill out all of the all the details of their life, whatever it may be. I mean, just something outside the mundane, and something outside, something that just reminds you that there's other people in the world, almost in a way,
Yeah.
who it's just a feeling of relief, kind of. So
Hmm.
that part of it is also true with the podcast, but obviously it's a different thing because even though it's a very, very, very small production, it's still, you're putting on a production. You're putting on something so that other people will be able to see it later on.
Right.
And you don't want to, and you're dealing with people who are, who you find interesting and you seek out, you know, before, as opposed to just stumbling into a person at a bar or something, which is how I usually have my conversations. So yeah, it's quite different in that sense. So that has a sense of like almost, before it almost feels like going on stage before you talk to, even though you're just talking to one person.
Yeah.
But so it kind of has like an exhilarating aspect to it, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so far so good. I mean, my podcast is very intermittent because I don't obviously don't make any money off it. I have a regular job. I have kids. I got all kinds of stuff to do. And one of my ideal lives, I'd be like Studs Terkel, and I'd have a radio show, and I'd be smoking this thing indoors, and I'd just be able to do this every day and get paid for it. But obviously, it's not the way it happens for most of us. But that's okay. I mean,
that would be amazing.
I wouldn't be any good at it anyway. So it's just there's a reason why there's so many fucking podcasts around here.
Oh,
because people obviously value conversation, and it's not always easy to get it without, I guess, trying to set something up.
Yeah, it's true what you say about the stage thing, and I'm like, as I alluded to before, I'm a recovering scene stealer, over talker, conversation dominator. Like early on in my dating my wife, we'd go to a party or something, and we'd be on our way back home, and it'd be kind of silent over on her side of the car, and I'd be like, ah, shit, I did it again. I dominated the conversation. And so there's something about the podcast. It's actually quite a similar thing to when I play on actual stages to do music, where I kind of know, like, this is the time now, like this is the, I don't know. There's something I like, that slightly elevated sense of it, because
Yeah.
I'm always gun shy in real life. I tend to just dive into stuff, and to take things to the to find the point of tension, or something really, like, kind of visceral to talk about with, like, just unsuspecting people. And get into
Uh,
hot button issues, and then I'm like, oh my goodness, this the time? I don't even know. But then with a podcast, you've kind of got a preset topic, like, what you're going to talk about, and then you've also got this deference for the other person that helps me kind of be less of an asshole. Anyway, yeah, it's an interesting thing.
yeah. No, that is an interesting thing. I mean, I know the feeling sometimes that, just of like being very exuberant and just saying something off the top of my head, and then later on being like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
I really didn't consider how. I just thought everybody was
Yeah.
taking it exactly the same way that I was saying it, but
Yeah.
that's often
No.
not the case.
Yeah, I really like to get down to the if there's any topic brought up, I like to get down to the human tension of it. Like, what are the two sides that I can see, or multiple sides that I can see of this, and how can I put myself in both, in the shoes of both, and then, like, kind of, like, I just kind of go off on stuff, and yeah. But the podcast, it helps with that, kind of streamline it into a topic that the guest has. But I guess, yeah, what I was saying earlier was, and I liked how you were putting it too, kind of feeling that you're looking for something, and it's just around the corner, and it's just over the hill. You can kind of see the glow of it, or you can see it through a veil.
Yeah.
And that is definitely something I relate strongly to, and that thing is, even to put names on it and words on it almost feels kind of sacrilegious. But we're talking God, we're talking spirit, we're talking, imagination, we're talking what human beings really are. We're talking about what reality really is. It's like this kind of this thing that I think it's fun to search for. It's fun to talk about. It's fun to find in each podcast guest their version of that. Their narrative of searching for this thing that we're searching for,
Yeah.
and it's also fun to get past the dare I say, kind of capitalist way of viewing it, that whatever this is we're looking for, there's a resource and there's power there when we get there, and that becomes what you're looking for. So if you're looking for, for example, you're looking for answers, like real honest to God answers to questions that you can then own and sell, or something like that, in a religious context, that you can have some kind of mastery of something. And there are all of these kind of narratives that maybe stop the maybe inhibit that sort of sense of promise, that there's still something around the corner, that there's still something over the hill, that there's still something through the curtain, that you saw it for a second, and that, I think that's almost become, and I feel like you can probably relate to this, that when I'm on my spiritual bullshit, you see these things flit by the window, and that I'm hitting the microphone.
You're
That is
getting animated here.
that's the thing. Like that's actually it. That's what I enjoy, or
Yeah.
something like that, and which makes it sound like I'm saying I enjoy not answering questions or something like that, which I guess that you can make an argument for. Does that kind of resonate with you at all?
Sure. I mean, well, isn't it strange, Aaron, that I mean, this kind of thing that you're talking about and that I'm talking about, whatever it is that we feel we're just out of reach that's worth looking for. We don't know what it is. We don't know if it is anything. We don't actually, I mean, I'm okay, I'm talking about myself. I have no idea. I assume other people don't know.
Please.
Some people seem to have a really strong opinion about it, but I mean, one thing, one good thing about having been a believer, then been some kind of an atheist, and then gotten past that part too, is that there's really no need. I don't feel the need to like pretend that I know things anymore about that, because it just doesn't make any sense to pretend that anymore for me. It's just the fact of the matter remains is that it's so strange that so much of my time in my inner life is taken up by wondering and thinking and like looking around for something which I don't even know exactly exists. Certainly not in the way that I suspect it does. My intuitions about it might be correct. They might not be correct at all. They might be complete illusions. No, these are all different feelings that I have over certain times of the day, even. And I don't, I'm not really privileging one or the other right now, just because we're talking about it more generally. I, I do tend to settle back more into one belief over the other or something like that. But when you
Right.
really stop and look back at it, it's like this is the predicament of being a human being. It's no wonder that we do search out things like power, like money, like status, because you're chasing the thing that everybody kind of at the bottom knows matters more than all that is something of a phantom, like
You can't hold it.
it's just an absurd position to be in.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so it's I don't blame people. I don't blame people like going off track spiritually and winding up just wanting to get rich and get laid or something. I mean, that's
Yeah.
not weird. That's not weird. That's at least it's
No.
ephemeral. It doesn't last, doesn't make you really happy, but it is at least concrete.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think about that quite a bit. Like, I don't know if it's possible to be, for everybody to be as comfortable with searching for the unnamed, as I am. And I don't want to graft that onto everybody and make it into some kind of a rule for life. But um, what I think, you have to always be okay, just one sec. So I guess the thing that I'm sure you do, because I know you're a dad with a job and a husband and all that, is you check in and you see how maybe you're changing based on the things that you're thinking and the things that you're pursuing in your inner life. And you look at the fruit that's taking place in your life, and hold it up against that. So it's not necessarily that there aren't any answers. It's just that it's not final answers. And I think we maybe have lost a bit of value in this. I call it keeping the wound open. Oh, you froze up. Are you there? Oh, there you
Oh,
are. Sorry, you froze up for a sec.
sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I call it keeping the wound open, which is just this keeping the door open a crack for God to to speak, which I guess means keeping the door open a crack for new information. And for me, it's we do try and tie things up so much, and we kind of devalue and kind of disrespect the notion of leaving loose ends. But I think something that actually comes up a fair bit on the podcast over all the episodes is this idea that of toxic knowledge. Like if you went to your wife today and said, you know what I really like about you is that I just know you to a certainty. You know, there is no, you have nothing left to reveal to me, and so it's not, you know, I don't have to worry that there's going to be any problems with you because, I mean, you're just there. You're in my box. You know what I mean? And like,
I hope you're not drawing from experience this anecdote here.
yeah, so my first wife, no, I'm still with my first wife. But yeah, if I'd probably be looking for another one if I did this. But yeah, like that's the thing. It's toxic. It's it's toxic for the person because they feel that they're not. Well, obviously, I don't even know if I have to explain that. But it's also toxic for the knower because you've thingified that which was supposed to be a wellspring of reality's face for you. You know what I mean? That was supposed to be a place where
Sure.
reality showed
Yeah.
itself, and so you've really cut yourself off. And when you start cutting yourself off and you become accustomed to that, where does that end? It certainly doesn't end with one person. You know what I mean? Like to me, if you and I were best friends and I did that to you, I thought, oh, yeah, I know what Matt's going to say. I know what he's going to do. It's nice that he's just so predictable. I feel like there'd be no way that attitude doesn't begin to metastasize. You know what I mean? It doesn't begin to creep into other things, and it creeps. We do it to children all the time, which to me is just such a horrifying idea. Yeah, I've got your number, you little shit. Like I know, like people do this to their kids, and then you do it to yourself, and then you're done. Does that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, there is and maybe I can sometimes have that tendency of having people, there being people in my life, not the closest people in my life, but just people that pass through as being like, oh, that's the so and so guy, or that's the this guy.
Right.
And when they just flit through, I mean, sometimes you don't have that much more to work with. Sometimes
Yeah.
it is just kind of like almost a sitcom character. But if you take that literally and you don't see that what you're doing is really just a matter of like a convenience or something for yourself, or laziness, then yeah, I think you do start to, well, I think you start to see yourself as the center of some kind of story, and everybody and everything else loses dimension. And I suppose that is the value of something like, well, a religion which is worth paying attention to, is that it kind of brings you maybe out of the center. And it doesn't devalue you. Certainly there are ways that religions do, and just ideologies or whatever do that too, kind of devalues you and the people around you. It's not that, it's just more like, I was actually thinking about this today, about how, yeah, it's not such a bad thing to see yourself as being, playing an essential but small part in the universe. you know like, it's not that you won't that what you do isn't important. It's terribly important, but it's not the center of everything at all. It's You're doing something that's way over to the side or something,
Yeah.
and the center of it all is way over somewhere else,
Yeah.
and you're probably going to die not knowing the real nature of your role. And that is something in the Bible that I think is a good thing to keep in mind. Like the idea, well, something like suffering, like it's good to realize, if suffering has to be a thing, which it does, I guess, it's good to realize that, you know, even if you don't understand your suffering, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's meaningless and that it doesn't have some kind of larger role. It just means you can't see what it is at the time. But why would you be able to see what it is? like you're caught in time. You can't, you don't even know what you're going to be like in a year.
Yeah.
Why would you know the outcome of like some kind of huge injustice or something? You
Right.
just don't know. And it's a little bit of a relief to think about it that way, I think, because it still gives value to what you're doing, or
Right.
you're allowed to have value, but it's not like if I don't figure this out now, like it's everything's fucked.
Yeah.
It doesn't really have to be that way, I don't think. You know.
Right.
But I mean, the other thing that I was thinking about today, which you very much alluded to, just in I was thinking about it in terms of just biblical story, because that's some of the shared interest that we have, is how much over the last couple of years the story of Jacob wrestling the angel, whoever the angel is,
Huge.
it's such a wonderful and important,
Yep.
to me, kind of uh, thing to remember, just as a guiding, almost a guiding light in a
Yeah.
way, because it just kind of hones in on this idea that like we're you're not necessarily failing if you're wrestling with these huge ideas. Like there's really no other option for us in the
Yeah.
midst of life, right? You know, you
Yeah.
you have to. The whole point is that you're trying to wrestle some kind of knowledge out of existence, and it's
Yeah.
it's not going to be, it's not going to just yield itself to like the way that you want it, but you might actually, you know, you're going to hurt yourself doing it, but you might actually gain something out of it too. You might
Oh
gain a bit.
yeah.
You'll lose it. You'll you know, get your leg out of its socket, and you'll get you'll gain
Yeah.
a new name or something. That's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
bad, you know. It could be worse.
No, it's a great story. That's one of the big ones. I feel like yeah, that leaps out to people like you and I. It doesn't even say, it's like a man wrestled with him until daybreak or something. Like, you know what? Wait, back up. What? You know, it's like one sentence, and yeah, it's like, you know, I do think the best the best thing to kind of hope for in life is purposeful suffering. That sounds terrible,
No, yeah, I agree.
but like purposeless suffering is all too common, and definitely I feel for everyone in that condition, and we all have it to some degree. But yeah, I guess that's maybe one of the goals that we might be searching for is is suffering for a purpose, and you know, even the idea of suffering, uh, to me, that's what separates us from the animals, is this idea of suffering that should not have been. like like I watched a documentary on rats where this rat gets autopsied. It gets, I don't know if they killed it or what, but it's just a pretty typical rat, and they are looking through and finding all the worms and like parasites and just foreign objects in this rat's body. It was just riddled with them, and it kept moving until the end. And I thought that was kind of a moment for me where I thought the rat keeps moving because life just keeps moving. Life keeps going, and to find a way. And human beings, we have this kind of, in a way, this handicap of always wanting to hold our suffering up against a standard, and usually a narrative involving ourselves, and involving what we've earned and what we haven't earned, and all of that. And I've always thought that maybe one of the things that really defines the Christian life, like a truly Christian life, is, and this is an ideal that I have not attained, but that you would never suffer. You you're not barred from suffering. You're not promised no suffering, but you will never have that feeling of cursing reality, and just I don't know if I'm making any sense, but that's kind of like, it's a lofty ideal. I'm not there by any means, but you know, that you would just be able to bear with the suffering that was necessary in your life, or something like that.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between, I don't know, doing it in a kind of like stoical way or something, um, where it's just very kind of its own. I don't know, for you. for the sake of your own kind of self-built dignity, you're just going to stick it out until the
Right.
end. And the Christian sense, which is that someone else goes before you in suffering, and that you're actually not alone. You're not like this lonely uh, kind of island of strength
Yeah. Yeah.
until you're dragged down into the
Yeah.
it's so there's a lot of different there's obviously you can see like how different people and cultures have tried to wrestle with this problem. I mean, obviously the answer that sort of that an atheist or someone would have, uh, or the argument against the like say Christian notion of what suffering is and what it means is that it doesn't really mean anything. It's, as you say, like a life just continues to go on, and you can't help that. So, you know, people have to come up with stories about why life continues to go on even when it seems like it shouldn't go on. And that's a powerful argument sometimes in light of, as you say, parasite filled rats and things like what the hell, why the hell does that have to happen, you know but it's it just the fact of the matter is, at least to me, is that it just simply didn't, the materialist worldview of that didn't satisfy on some fundamental level. And I just, it's, I don't know what to do with that exactly. It just didn't.
Yeah.
So why didn't it? I mean, why do you suppose that, you know, we come from very different backgrounds, I guess, but we still have that sense of there being something around the corner, that's bigger than all of us, and that has some kind of fundamental meaning. And I think fundamental truth in like a good sense, like fundamental goodness or something, fundamental love or something like that. Why is that so persistent? And why how, it has to be something pretty fundamental, because you do get people from who are very different from each other in other ways, at least seeming to have this same intuition. I
Yeah.
mean, have you always had that sense yourself?
I think yes. But I was raised in in ultra conservative Christian culture. My dad's a pastor, still is, and Southern Baptist was my upbringing. We're not directly, nobody in the, yeah, he's not involved in Southern Baptist Church anymore, but in essence the same idea. And so I I kind of had two sides to myself. One was, well, I'm not measuring up to the truth. I can't, I felt kind of deep down I couldn't hack it, and that, you always have, when belief in God, that God exists, is such a fetish. You're always concerned that you don't, like deep
Yeah.
down, maybe I don't, maybe I don't. What if, and you have these conversations when you're around campfires and stuff, but you're not supposed to, you have them in hushed tones, what would you do if God didn't exist? And you have friends saying things like, well, I would probably still act like God did exist, because it's just, I'm so, like, I just need that to be true, and kind of thing. And so deep down, I always felt I was on my way towards atheism, I think. And then one day I started to let go of the reins and acknowledge to myself that it was, I was on that path. I was going to be an atheist, and listening to atheists and stuff like that, not calling myself one publicly. And then I guess I just realized that I had this really kind of undefined sense that I just didn't want to be an atheist. I just didn't want to not believe. I didn't want to put God in a box anymore, but I didn't. I had no particular reason to say there wasn't a God, and so I think it was a very slow thawing of realizing that I believe that love is a real thing. Like, and
Yeah.
and that I have seen, I was very lucky to do, my biggest soul searching and deconstructing, or whatever you want to call it, my biggest kind of shuffle around while already a father and husband. So I was really grounded to the fact that sacrificial love was like a very, very powerful thing, much greater than anything my mind could argue me out of, because it had a form, like my son. I can't remember. I think, yeah, I think it all started when I probably just had one, but I remember even when my daughter was a tiny baby, kind of having these thoughts. I was researching the flat Earth not because I believed in it, but because I was so fascinated by the nature of human belief, and I was like, on some level, what if I'm the equivalent of this flat Earth thing,
Right.
but with this deity,
Yeah.
and I really wanted to just sit in that and deal with that. I even started writing. I didn't write it out, but I kind of had this idea for this movie. You would do a big budget Hollywood movie where it's back at the beginning of the space race. It's revisionist history. They get up to space and they realize it is flat. And like, even though you wouldn't have to have anyone involved in the movie really believe in the flat Earth, but wouldn't it be fascinating to deal with that in an extremely, get a great actor, to or actress to play the lead role, and who just has to sit up there in the capsule looking down at the flat Earth and just being like, well, fuck, you know what I mean? Like,
That's a great idea. I like
yeah,
it.
I still kind of like the idea, but this was where my mind was going. But like, I mean, and thank you for asking me a question, and because now I'm off and running, and now I'm going to talk too much, but you sort of, it brings up the idea of like, are my beliefs just the propositional beliefs that I would tell you are my beliefs? Because I spouted a bunch of beliefs for a long time that I wasn't intentionally lying. I was just I was given the truth wholesale, and I was selling it. I was a reseller of the truth. I got it from the supply chain, and I put it on my shelves, and and so
Well, it's often very hard to know, especially when you're young, to what extent you actually do believe something. I
yeah,
mean, you don't. It's almost a it's a very hard question to how do you gauge it? Like, do you assign a number to how much you believe in? I don't know.
yeah,
I mean, it's like it's
yeah,
just you just live your life and you say these things and you're part of an environment. And
yeah,
yeah, of course, you don't really have a. I mean, that's part of what growing up is. It's trying to grapple with the facts of what have I inherited
hmm,
in terms of my beliefs and what have I come to find out,
yeah,
and then beyond that, what have I what am I continue to be drawn to in spite of maybe
yeah,
my rational analysis of it.
exactly. You watch your emotions very carefully. Once you figure out that's a big key. You watch your emotions. Do your emotions correspond to what you say you believed? Are you repulsed by what you're supposed to be repulsed by? Are you overjoyed by what you're supposed to be overjoyed by? And for I've always kind of harbored this feeling that everybody else, their overjoyedness was their overjoyedness, their repulsion was their repulsion. You know what I mean? Like, they were just experiencing the emotions of what they truly believed and what they knew they believed at the same time. And I don't know how true that is. It might even sound ridiculous to people to hear me say that, but that's where I was at, disconnected from my beliefs, emotions, but a lot of things still kind of matching up pretty well, like especially a lot of the stuff to do with the resonance of Christ in my life. You know what I mean? And that's true of a lot of people who leave the faith entirely. They never really decide that Jesus was a bad guy, like
Right. Right.
they just are like, well, it's all part of this big machine, and I can't just keep what I want and throw away what I want, so I'm just going to throw the whole thing away. Like, I remember trying to explain to somebody, even in would have been about grade 10, um, that it felt like there was an internal logic, and I was proud of myself because I don't think anyone had ever said the word internal logic to me, but I was like, there's an internal logic. I realize it sounds crazy, but there is something going on in this religion, that that had an internal logic to it. So I guess the person that I am now is just finally in the baby phases, I think, of the kind of intrigue and fascination and kind of wonder of seeking God or something like that, which is, I'm happy to do it now that it, I don't even like to say now that it's happening, but like now that I'm aware, I'm blessed to be aware of it in some way. It's an interesting ride. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a much different starting point for your children too, and for my children, or than if I don't know about obviously what your family does, or everybody has. It's just interesting how, and maybe this is a quirk of the modern age, that it feels like in some sense that there were a lot of true believers back in the generation of my grandparents,
Right.
and there were a lot of people in my parents' generation, maybe the boomer generation or whatever, who quite faithfully went through the motions, um, not quite knowing what to make of it, but definitely just took it as a cultural convention and a good one. And then there's the generation of doubt. We're pretty much talking at least about, I would say, they're not as much Europe. They probably went through this already, I guess, but the Western English speaking world, because the drop off in specific religious belief is incredible.
Yeah.
And then it's the question is, what will the next generation, where will they go with it? Because
Yeah.
they're not going to lose, I don't think, the religious impulse.
No.
They're not going. I mean, and you can see it crop up in a million different little ways, um, which is interesting, but a little frightening and stuff, of just people following just whatever. I don't know. I mean, it's the whole spiritual but not religious thing, and people turn to just all
Yeah.
kinds of little things that they kind of like, and they kind of attach their hopes of eternity and spirituality on that. And people still continue to seek and try to fill that part of their lives with something, but it's in a much different way than
Yeah.
communities in the past, and it's
Yeah.
hard to know where it's going.
Yeah. It's the and sorry, am I interrupting?
No.
Um, it's I mean, you're right that the spiritual intuition, I think, is as strong as ever, and the religious impulse is as strong as ever. And you know, the one that comes to mind is the current discussion, if you can even call it a discussion, about gender, because I see it as a deeply spiritual thing, and not a spiritual, the righteous versus the forces of darkness, but spiritual in terms of a generation of people has started to clue into the fact that there is a spiritual element to gender, that there is an element of gender that is not related to our biology. And so this is typical of what I was talking about earlier, jumping off on hot button topics. So feel free to not dive deeply into this topic if you don't want to. But I mourn the lack of of engagement with between institutional churches and this topic, because I mean I know there's all kinds of engagement on all sides of the spectrum, but
Not very good engagement, though.
not very good engagement. Yeah, no, I mean it's either and I and when I say this, I'm not saying I have a desire for even a big debate that's being properly held. I think I think it would be wonderful if spiritual people were leaning in, and I've done this on my podcast. I've tried to put my money where my mouth is on some episodes of the podcast where I've leaned in and I've said, take me to the through the landscape of your mind that you've been navigating, like, you know, and it takes zero effort, none at all, to see that it's a genuine search, that it's a genuine impulse that comes from a deep sense of identity. You know what I mean? Like, of course, there's superficial people in every, you know, in every walk of life. I'm sure you could find someone to support some claim against transgendered people, but I think that's the fact remains. You know, if you find an intelligent person, like I had Buck Angel on my podcast, and I've had an asexual person, and just like I like to talk about these things because you just immediately see through conversation that there's a whole world here, and that God is there as much as God is anywhere. And like I said, I don't want to derail it onto a particular topic necessarily, but we're talking about the spiritual and the religious impulse, and unfortunately, right now it seems to be divided, very harshly divided, into those who feel we are completely self-creating versus those who feel like we have basically, there are no more revelations about the human condition, about what a human being is or could be.
Right.
And that's a really dangerous place to be. And as I said earlier, I mean, there's that whole idea of toxic knowledge, right? And that it really is, I mean, at its core, I think that the spiritual impulse is that open wound, and is that idea that no matter how certain I am about the truth, it's bigger. And, you know, like you said earlier, there's something bigger. It's more. There's a moreness to it. And so, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
flailing
I
around.
mean, it seems like fear and discomfort is mostly driving this kind of thing. And this would maybe be a case in which at least part of like the negative side of the technology and social media interactions comes out really well, or really like obviously, because
Clearly.
yeah, because I mean, you just have the ability to every day in your echo chamber, whatever it is, see the worst version of your enemy's argument, or the worst thing that they did that day, or the worst thing that some
Yeah.
troubled person or something said, or the way that they put something that didn't make any sense, and it just becomes a way to kind of reestablish how right you are to be
Yeah.
in the tribe that you are. And that's that has to be, and I mean, I'm not like talking about the way other people are, I'm the same way. And it has to be, you know, one of those, it has to be like the ideological equivalent of just like coming up with excuses for why you don't have to get out of bed in the
Yeah.
morning. I mean, you don't want to push the conversation forward. You don't want to have to change your opinion, and you can see like these religious institutions just not wanting to deal with this issue because it might mean that they have to change, and it
Yeah.
might mean the things that they have held on to in terms of truth are not completely right.
Yeah.
And you know, that's
Yeah.
institutions don't like that any more than individuals do. So yeah, I mean,
It,
obviously, you're definitely we're running into this. I guess it's kind of like our culture is showing how shallow it is right now because we're just really not engaged. I mean, you see it all. I mean, including a lot of the people, a lot of like the religious thought leaders. It's a wonderful term, isn't it? The thought leaders who whenever something, it's just something like, I don't know, some crazy thing happens, some LGBT person said who no one's ever heard of or something says something dumb, and that's just their Twitter for
yeah,
that's just the conservative religious Twitter for the
yeah,
day. And then they get
yeah,
another one in another 2 days. And it's
yeah,
like eventually it's like, okay, but what are we doing exactly?
yeah,
What you're not getting to the bottom of anything.
yeah,
You're not like constructively like talking about it. You're just kind of whistling through another day without having figured out anything.
yeah.
Uh,
And
so I
you're,
don't know. That part's pretty depressing because it
yeah,
seems to keep happening, and it happens even to people who have the ability to be thoughtful and constructive and you
yeah.
know
It paints the truth as a very fragile thing. Um, you know, it it implies that these other people, their enemies, have the ability to destroy the truth, um,
yeah,
in people's minds and undermine it to the point that it won't have its potency anymore. The line that comes to my mind, I don't think it's from anywhere, but is, and then you will know the truth, and the truth will confine you in successive cages until until you're just completely bound. Like,
well, it's an obvious sign of weakness. It's an
yeah,
obvious sign of weakness when we respond in that way, and when institutions or religions respond in that way. It reminds me of something that Martin Shaw said when I was talking to him about recently on my last podcast episode.
yeah,
We
great
were talking
episode.
about, thank you. We were talking about religion and how a fear, a religion that is based too much on fear, can get just kind of reactionary. And we were talking about it actually in terms of like missionary work, and he said something like, you know, it's it's crazy for people to think, you know, it's crazy for a missionary to think that they found a place in the world where God didn't get there first.
Yeah,
And I thought that's a
yeah,
very, very succinct way of putting it. It's
yeah,
like, yeah, exactly. Like if your beliefs and your religion isn't big enough even for like the world that we know or other cultures, if it's not even big enough to account for that, then obviously it's lacking something. It
yeah,
can't, and that's true in terms of, like you say, like it has to be true in terms of different communities, like LGBT communities or political communities and stuff like that. I mean, you can have specific criticisms of specific ideas within it, but to think that it's like outside what can even be comprehended
yeah,
just means that obviously you're lacking something. Like your worldview has to be lacking something. It can't, people
yeah,
can't be outside that,
yeah,
by definition, you know,
yeah. No,
unless you
absolutely.
have a tribal, unless you just have some kind of tribal god. But that's not the god that most religious
Well,
people purport to believe in. It's supposed to be a universal one.
yeah. Unfortunately, that is how it seems to be a lot of times, and yeah. I mean, I have to. It's again an idea of two worlds. Like, I have to be in two worlds. In one world, I am inexplicably being drawn back into uh, a faith that I was certain I was leaving behind,
Yeah.
and in this world, it has a real, honest to goodness, measurable utility for me. Like, it has brought clarity, peace. It's improved relationships, and then on the other side, I have to say that there's a certain instantiation of it that probably should die.
Mhm.
And I don't want to be prescriptive. I don't want to be the one to hold the scalpel. and choose where that goes. I mean, I guess there's some arms, the Westboro Baptist Church kind of arms we could pretty easily, we could slice that off. But I don't know, like what is Western culture without Christianity? But what is the dominant Christianity in Western culture? It's a huge tension that you know I find it hard. I find people like yourself and other people, maybe in this corner of the internet, as some say, uh, who I can stomach, and then a lot that I can't. But I guess without going far down the road, of kind of insulting Christianity, uh, I want to know your kind of spiritual narrative, or your arc, of your life. Where'd you come from, and where did it go, and what happened?
Well, let me spin you a yarn.
Please.
I mean, I don't know, fairly conventional, I guess, in some ways. I mean, I was raised, I always say vaguely Catholic. So I think part of from New England, which I guess is, pretty Protestant tradition in some ways historically, but there are a lot of Catholics in where we are, and I was raised in a uh, by parents who were not religious in terms of their. We didn't talk much about religion at all. We didn't have strong discussions. It's not something, I can't remember if I said prayers before bed or anything like that, but it was always there in the sense that we would go to, especially when we were young, we'd go to mass, Catholic mass on Sundays, usually, at least for a stretch. We'd go to religious education, CCD, catechism, and all,
Oh.
Catholic schools, not Catholic school, but Catholic teachings, like you do once a week or something after school, with the idea of, you go through the sacraments, you eventually get, well, you start by obviously being baptized, and you do your first communion when you're something around second grade, and then eventually one time around 14ish you get confirmed, and that's the track. And that's, again, as soon as I started like challenging uh my parents on ideas when I was a, youngish teenager, or maybe before, they had some kind of answers. They didn't have much answers, and they didn't really indicate that they had spent a ton of time thinking. I have no idea if how much they thought about it, but like they weren't like formulating answers to these questions that I had. So yeah, raised vaguely Catholic, went to mass a decent amount, and then personally, I always had a very strong sense uh, of God in some way. It's hard to define exactly the way in which I did have a strong sense. I mean, I remember the adults around me saying that I did, and the way that I talked about it was not typical. Um, and that I had some sort of connection or something to something beyond. And why did they think that? Maybe it's because of the questions I asked. Maybe it's the fact that I would go up to the church to sit after mass when people were, supposed to be having coffee, or the kids are supposed to be like playing ball or something. So I always had that feeling. Um, and then I definitely distanced myself from Catholicism as I became when I got into second and when I got into middle school. But it kind of, I kind of turned more towards a more evangelical shout and holler style uh, thing. Uh, and I went to a few, weirdly enough, there was this pretty eccentric middle school substitute teacher, and she was wore her religion on her sleeve, and eventually got, I think, uninvited to be a substitute teacher later on in life, after I had gone through that school. But I thought she was great because she just openly talked about religion and ideas and things like that. And I loved the idea of talking to adults. That was all I ever wanted to do when I was a kid. I mean, my mother would make me go play with the kids, and I'd be like, I'd rather just hang out with the moms while drink coffee and gossip and stuff like that. That I had no interest in playing with kids my age, so I was a weird kid. And
Great.
yeah, so anyway, my distancing uh, from my vague Catholic, who knows what it would have been like if I actually went to Catholic school like my father had to do, but since I didn't, it wasn't, I couldn't really bite into it much. I think it kind of maybe bored me, or I wasn't getting the feeling I was looking for. So I would go to some of these prayer meetings that were not at all like Catholicism. It would be, oh my, I mean, I'm sure you know about them, like the Kenneth Copeland style, them, right? Like the
Yeah.
Word of Faith Pentecostal, TV Pentecostal
Oh
stuff.
boy. Slain in the
And
spirit.
yeah, and in fact, I mean, I
Ooh.
did go up to who was the preacher? I forget what his name was. Kenneth Hagan, maybe. And and walked up. I was probably like 13 or so. You know, all the whole bit. He was calling people up and boom, 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 and they went down like dominoes. Yeah, it was quite impressive. So I went up and got you know hit on the forehead. I forget, they must have had like ushers behind them or something to catch everybody who was slain, or almost everybody. And I did fall back, and I do have this memory, it's pretty spotty memory of it, but of getting back up and kind of feeling, tingly, and just this something had happened, substantial. But I also kind of remember this feeling of being like, well, that was something else, but it also, I kind of expected something a little bit better. It was like, if that was really the spirit of God, it was like, yeah, all right, all right, all right. It was something. It was something. Um,
What would the
so
Yelp, you make a Yelp review of the spirit of God, I guess.
I would have been 4 out of 5 stars, and I was hoping to, do a full. I don't. Why wasn't it a five? It
I
was
mean, not
God.
a bad review, but it is God. So
Maybe 3. I
you would
don't know.
hope it would be up to a five.
I don't want to put too much of a retrospective spin on it. I'm sure if there's a closed circuit footage of it, I would have looked quite convincing going down.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, so there was a bit of that for a few years, which led directly to my uh enchantment with the new atheist, with Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins
Yeah.
and Sam Harris and all of them.
Yeah.
Now, I don't find anything really weird about that trajectory. um it's they're they're just, kind of seekers from the other side, in a sense, or at least engaged in that kind of discourse about belief and the place of rationality versus the place of intuitive feeling and all that stuff I was interested in. I kind of felt probably a little bit like a tourist going through the more Pentecostal evangelical world. And I do remember, even as a kid, walking through and seeing these adults, hearing their conversations, not to other children, not to children, but to amongst themselves, and being like, things that I'm talking about. Yeah, the Big Bang. Sure, there was a Big Bang. God said bang, and that was it. And just like just hearing things and feeling like, just hearing things that were clearly, I don't know, scripts, and that sort of stuff. So
Rehearsed.
yeah, rehearsed and parroted and everything. And I don't want to, belittle people's faiths and worldviews about things and whatever. I mean, I have no idea how fully that those kinds of feelings were felt on each individual level of people that I came across. I'm sure some of them were quite wise and knew a lot more than I do, but
But
I did.
you're spinning a yarn, so we can, for the
Yeah.
sake of the yarn, we can go with the narrative.
Okay. Yeah. They were fools. No, I mean,
Fuck
they,
those guys.
it was very interesting. But there was a certain, it was a certain, kind of noble. I don't know. I still have a soft spot for it. There's still part of me that loves all that stuff. I appreciate people who are who aren't just like living their day as if they're gonna, do this, the things that they're doing on the surface is just going to keep happening forever, and they're not going to die. Like
Yeah.
I appreciate people who were really thinking about what's happening in the beyond and what's beyond the curtain, and yeah, that's what a lot of these folks are doing. They were looking,
Yeah.
and and I guess so was I, and it didn't sustain me. And the way that they talked about hell, and um, I remember somebody in our community dying, and the very religious person saying just like, oh, I hope he knew Jesus. And I said, well, yeah, I was a kid. I was like 13. And I was like, well, he was a really good guy, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, well, you can be a good guy and still go to hell. I was like, well, that's a little bit cold. I mean, maybe you're right, but I didn't like the way that it was just kind of not wrestled with. Like that's a huge problem. That's not a trivial thing. It's not like, well, that's the way it is. And
Yeah.
no, I mean, if you're talking about really believing in eternal damnation, there was just a kind of frivolousness to it, in a way,
Yeah.
in an unthinkingness to it that I really couldn't stomach at all. So that was part of it. I don't know what the other parts were. Probably just on to the next thing. I was, hitting a different part of my life. So on to the new
Restless.
atheists, on to the
Yeah.
new atheists, and on to the joy of argument and in battle and insults, and you know the the secular heroes like Hitchens, who could turn a phrase, and if someone insulted him, he could swing back with something funny, and he liked to drink whiskey too, and he was, as I have a sip, and you know just fascinating stuff. And they, just wrestling. I mean, the fact of the matter is, uh, they did kill a substantial part of what I did believe. So they didn't like, they didn't fail in their task in some sense. I mean, people talk about now in what we call this little corner about how, the new atheists didn't engage with the real meat of Christian belief. And I think that is true. But there was also, I'm just tens or hundreds of thousands of people who were Christians who didn't engage with the meat of religious belief. And that part, it's not a tragedy that that part got kind of
Yeah.
smashed a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
that was that other part. And then, eventually it's like, how far am I willing to, how pleased and how satisfied am I with the purely rational materialist uh, uh, explanation for why we're here, why we love, what consciousness is. And then just honestly, like hearing about the way that neuroscientists talk about things like consciousness and what it is, and them not even being able to, people at this, top of their field, the people who think the most about this stuff, not being able to even like not being able to agree with each other in fundamental things.
Yeah.
That to
It.
me was like, yeah, okay, so they don't know either.
Yeah. It's hotly contested still.
It's still fundamentally mysterious. Okay. Um, and so I think for that reason, the pendulum started swinging back a little bit, where I was like, okay, I mean, I definitely have cut out a lot of nonsense that I thought I was true and wasn't true. But these guys are kind of, none of these people are without ego. None of these people can account for certain things that, I was hoping that they might. And the search kind of continues, and you kind of, it's like the old Chesterton thing of being like finding yourself washed up on a foreign shore, and then you realize, you look around, there's like, oh, this is the city I actually came from, but with a new perspective on it. So it was kind of like that, I guess. But I think you're right about, and here I am going on and on, uh the addition of family, I think, at least kicked into a higher gear, or just made me more serious about thinking about things beyond the immediate, things beyond the material, and if there is really meaning after death, or if we're really just, on this rock for some meaningless reason and we're going to be gone from it soon. Yeah, I mean, I think that narrowed my mind in terms of getting serious about searching again. It probably had something to do with, I can't say exactly when or how that started, but I mean, you're a teenager, you don't have much to lose. But when you start getting something to lose, then, you know, uh, I don't know. You do ask yourself, why is there so much to lose?
There are stakes.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
stakes are there suddenly. Yeah,
Yeah. And you certainly want to be, careful about what you say when you have children and what you tell them, and you have to tell them something. You
right.
know, that was the big turning point for me, or that was the part of the equation that kept me from, some kind of self-righteous feeling, because you see people who feel that they've actually changed the way that their mind fundamentally works. Like I have a atheist friend who I respect a great deal, but uh he's pretty convinced that now that he's an atheist, he has atheist instincts, and atheist, and like he does not act from that place of Christianity like he did before. And it's kind of
Right.
like, I mean, it's in a way, the nature of belief is a big thread in this conversation to me, because it's like, um, well, you can't change, your underlying programming. You can't, the movie Inception is kind of about that. You've got all these things down in the basement, um, and not all bad things. Like even you were saying about hell earlier. Um, you can be a good person and go to hell. It's like, well, but what does it mean to know Jesus?
Right.
Would a person who lived a life of sacrificial love for others, love for neighbor, you know, uh, charitable in the true sense of the word, would you really say they don't know Jesus? Like,
Right. Or that they know him less than a bunch of people who are
yeah,
saying the right words. Yeah.
yeah,
Right. I mean, that didn't make any sense. Of course, I later found out that there's a whole, going all the way back to the early church fathers, there's a whole argument about this from the very beginning.
yeah.
And, this wasn't just like, a point scored for non-belief, or
Yeah, yeah. No,
this was something that was happening within the tent of Christianity and had
there's
always been happening.
yeah. I mean, even in the Bible, there's the parable, and oh man, I may be getting it wrong, but uh, of the two workers, one said he would go to the field and work. The other said he wouldn't. At the end of the day, though, like the one who said he wouldn't go did go and did the work.
Yep.
And it's sort of like who was right in that situation, the person who got down to it and did the work, or the person who said they were going to do the work.
Right.
I mean, it's self-evident, but
Yeah, and just the gospel message of, I mean, of the behavior of the Pharisees and Sadducees versus what Jesus actually did, and who
yeah,
he associated with. I mean, that sort of
the
stuff.
wrong
It's
sword.
like you just have to read it.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, it's all, you just have to read it and realize that,
yeah,
you know, I don't know. It seems, when you actually read the source material, it seems kind of obvious
yeah,
that there's just a lot of posturing going on in the official,
yeah.
in the church hierarchies.
Absolutely. Another thing that came to mind as you were talking is that um, I think there comes a point for people like you and me where you're in a phase of some kind of undefinedness, between different viewpoints, and you sort of start to realize that your religion is largely a language for characterizing your life, characterizing the things that you you really do believe in your life. And like that happened for me. I'm not sure if it happened for you, but a friend of mine asked me like, why do you still uh or why are you still a Christian? And I was like, well, I know the Sunday school answer, but I really like, because it was an email thread, I took a second and I was like, I'm still a Christian because I can't learn a new language. Like,
Yeah.
because I'm still more than ever wanting to describe um, my life and my experience, what reality might be, in a way that I can pass on to my children, in a way that will instill some kind of confidence in me and my wife, like from my wife. And I can't learn a new language. Like, and like, I know that's the most weak sauce type of faith. I mean, but by the way I was raised, that's the most weak faith that you could possibly imagine. It's like it's
Yeah.
like saying that it's just, but I wasn't saying I was going through the motions. That's the weird
Right.
thing about it.
That's
It
that's
sounds
that's the hard
like
thing that's the hard thing to describe,
it.
but you're right.
Yeah, it sounds like you're just going through the motions. It sounds like I'm saying, well, it's what I'm comfortable with, but no, it gets down like, what is a language? Like, you know, there's a language in my head that I use to express thoughts to myself, to express the world to myself. And when certain scriptures and things are just in there, they're just there. Abraham fighting with the angel. Um, uh, you know, these things are the language of my mind. And at that point, and I think at every point, I hope I am willing to let the search for truth combined with the language of my mind lead me out of my beliefs. You know, like if there's no truth, if there's no, in the parables that live just like, in my synapses, if there's no truth, I, I feel pretty confident I can start to move towards that realization, because it's not going to have it's going to become purely intellectual. It's not going to have any um, resonance outside of my own mind, and I can just kind of naturally evolve out of it. But until then, you know, my mind can't be uh, cleared out, like a big open void for me to just populate with a new wholesale ideology. And so I guess in a way, um, I feel like that was maybe the most honest answer that I could give about my faith. I don't know if that's resonating with you.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And very well put. And I think it's a worthy question from your friend who posed it. Um,
Yeah, I should ask myself that. Keep going.
but you know, yeah, it's to me, it's like even if it is just a story or just a myth or something like that, and you accept the grammar of the question of the questioner who poses it, that isn't really the end of that discussion, because the discussion then becomes what is your story, what is your narrative, and do you have something that goes deeper than the narrative? Because with your Christianity, you don't just have a story, but you also have a continuity. You have a continuity from birth, at least, and it really goes further than that. Of course, it goes all the way to the roots of of civilization, of our civilization, English speaking or beyond. Um, and okay, maybe when you just say, well, why do you have to hang on to these stories? It's just like the secular world hangs on to stories like no tomorrow, but they're hanging on to a superhero story, or they're hanging on to the stories that, to me seem a lot more tenuous and
Yeah.
have glimpses of maybe even glimpses of real insight and brilliance. Um, but you know, from the perspective of a kind of a secular critic, it's still just a story.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure exactly what I'm
Well,
supposed to be giving up here.
yeah.
It's like, what am I trading it for?
Yeah.
Like, would
Yeah.
you have something deeper than that?
Yeah.
I don't see it. Why? I mean, yeah, this stuff goes right to the heart
No.
of our culture. It goes right to the heart of our sense of self. It goes right to the heart of our moral system and where we derive our just our basic moral intuitions and our intuitions on things like rights and things. And the more I look at it, the more I think that it's just an extraordinary story. It's just a wonderful story. It's full of
Yeah.
mystery, and you don't even know exactly why some of it is so interesting and attractive, and there's parts of it that are very deeply troubling and make you
Yeah.
very uncomfortable. But it's got everything.
Yeah.
Why would I abandon it? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, I laughed earlier when you said it's just a story because I know that I mean, you're a writer type and, an aficionado of narrative and myth and imagination and, and all of that. I think you and I both believe that stories go, you know, there are good stories and mediocre stories and bad stories and the difference is not in how true they are in the real physical world. The difference is in the not just the truth but the sense of truth that they imbue. That
Yeah.
Esther Meek, who was on my show, the
Yep.
oh man, I wish I could quote it perfectly, but it's the she really values the um undefined sense of future possibility. So it's like there's something
Yeah.
for now, and there's this tantalizing, tingling sensation of moreness, and I think that's the Malcolm Guite uh, thing as well. Is that you know uh, stories touch the imagination. Imagination touches much deeper places than our little administrative. Hello, this is Aaron. Months after this interview was recorded, at this point, the Zoom cut out for a minute. We had to reconnect, and for some reason, if you're watching this on YouTube, after this point, the recording switched into the mode where it only shows the speaker. So, just so you're not too jarred by that, here we go back to the conversation. Yeah. Okay. So there we go. Yeah. You know, and you said continuity. There is a continuity back in time, which I can understand somebody hearing something about the continuity of Christianity and just doing an eye roll, because it's like, oh, okay, so because you're in lockstep with people who you're just inheriting, you're not thinking about it, you know you're not bringing this forward um, yourself. But continuity, I'm trying to form a thought here, so I'm just going to grasp towards it. um, Another word for continuity would be coherence, and or another way you could look at the same concept is the concept of coherence. And yes, if you want to say that one of these traditions that has had continuity back for time immemorial, one of them has to be right and supreme above all others, then yes, that is not coherent. But when you consider culture and yeah, culture and society as a a continually cresting wave, um, there are, well, I mean, the Peugeot brothers talk about fractals
Yep.
within the truth. And so coherence isn't just the idea of an ongoing um, relay race where the baton just keeps getting passed and keeps getting passed and keeps getting passed. And it's an endless game of telephone where it just gets dumber and dumber until it dissolves. It's more like there is some coherence of truth in the idea of God, in the idea, well, in Christianity, that has reflected reality in a real enough way that it has survived all kinds of ridiculousness and human frailty and and been passed along. And as I say this, I'm really not trying to describe. I'm really not leading towards Christian supremacy. Uh, I'm not saying it's a stronger narrative. It has more coherence than anything else. I'm just saying that we overlook um, continuity and coherence to our detriment. In other words, in nature, we see ecosystems where we can grasp, we can, because we are above, conceptually above the level of an ecosystem. We have the ability to observe an ecosystem. We can see what the bee does. We can see how what the bee does enhances, pollinates the flowers, and how the flowers, have an effect on oxygen levels or whatever. We can see that, but we even within that, you know, we cannot take our knowledge as all the knowledge there is. Like, not that long ago, I don't know exactly, but they discovered these fungal tubules that connect all the trees. I'm sure, like, it's one of those things that's been talked about a lot, and that there's science stating that trees share nutrients, and through these tubules that who knows exactly how it works and how it's administrated, but or somebody probably does, but that wasn't something we were always aware of, and yet the coherence that we could see gave us a sense of the coherence of nature. And when we go out in science, we expect coherence. No one is ever scientifically expecting absolute chaos. I mean, we expect, man, I'm really on a tear here. I'm sorry, but we expect entropy, but we don't expect actual incoherence in reality. And so the coherence of our internal reality, we have always been attempting to describe its shape. And we've got one of those kind of Goodwill Hunting style blackboard situations going on, like just absolutely chock full, and it's a fucking nightmare to start somewhere and try and work your way through it, but we kind of do that, and we kind of have guides to help us through that. But I'm not in favor of wiping the blackboard, and wanting to start over in any kind of way. And I certainly don't think there's any evidence that we are actually free of that coherence and of that humanity, of
No, that seems like an illusion.
Yeah,
That seems like an illusion, and
or even a dream.
Yeah, a dream. I mean, yeah, and I don't really trust the people who are so certain that, yeah, wiping the slate is the way to go about it.
Yeah,
It just doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't seem to be talking about the way that people relate to themselves and to each other,
yeah,
to their past and to everything. I don't
yeah,
see, I just personally don't see the appeal, but some people obviously do. I mean, some people, in the same way that some people really like, modern architecture versus old. I mean, that so
yeah.
there are some things, personality differences in people that I just have to accept are
Well,
fundamental. But I don't know. I mean,
and I think there's a value. I mean, uh, there's a value in grasping towards uh, self. How would I put it? There's a value in grasping. Actually, you mentioned architecture, and I think that's movements in art and architecture are something that um, I see as indicative of um, different approaches to what a human being is. And there are many people who are against the sterile modernity, against the modern art and modern architecture, geometric shapes, perfect lines, clean surfaces. And you can see behind me, like I would be in the camp. I like modern art and modern architecture more than many people of my bent, though, because whether it's conscious or not, I feel like um, through these mediums, people are making an attempt to step outside humanity almost into an ante room um, in which you can really feel your humanity. Like if you were to come in uh, from a hard day's work in the fields, caked in mud and sweat,
yep,
and you were to walk into an absolutely pure, sterile white room, uh, you would be aware of every little bit. And maybe this isn't where you thought I was going, but you would be aware of every little bit of what made you a human. All of the signs of your efforts would be written on you in a way that would be very, very obvious. And so I don't think that I think these art movements and architectural movements represent a deep subconscious uh, desire to hold humanity up against something else. Uh, and I guess the danger in anything is to just the um, let the products that we create begin to then dictate who we are, rather than actually looking at who we are. And I think it's perfectly okay to look at who we are up against the lens of, all right, I've stepped outside. I want to look back at myself, um, or look back at humanity. Um, yeah, I mean, I do think it's definitely dangerous um, to just think we can wholesale change. I mean, change who we are at some fundamental level. And I think, but I think that the real collateral damage of that is just in the actual lives of people who are doing it in an unhealthy way. It's not one of the reasons that I don't get as uppity as some is that I feel like the most inhuman instantiations of some of these concepts just won't survive because the masses won't reach for them,
yeah,
or something like that. That there'll be a sort of natural water finding its level kind of thing where we will say, look, I mean, um, we've had to have a conversation about what a human being is because uh, people are horrible and abusive sometimes about what we must be. and and there are you know millions upon millions of victims of people who were certain about humanity. I don't know how to describe what I'm saying. Maybe do you have any thoughts percolating, because I feel like I'm really
Well,
going crazy here.
yeah, I, not so crazy that
Sorry.
you're lifted off the ground or anything. I mean, the that kind of the last thing you were saying kind of reminded you what Paul Vanderklay has said, which is that you know he doesn't get so worked up about a lot of the cultural stuff in the same way. Like he doesn't get frothy about
Right.
it in the same way that some people do, and maybe in his circles, because he just thinks that it's unsustainable on its own. Like there has to
Yeah.
be a corrective to that, and he's got a lot of wisdom in that sense. Like he's very
Yeah.
good at having a kind of, it's probably just the wisdom of a pastor who's seen a lot of reality
Yeah.
over the course of his life. Um, and I think that's right, and that is connected to what you're saying about, you know, we all have our different feelings aesthetically about what makes good art, what makes good architecture, what makes good literature, what makes whatever. But when something gets too outside uh, something that's grounded
Yeah.
and gets too conceptual, or in religion, if it gets too almost, Platonic or something, it does have to get pulled back just by the nature of reality. It just does get pulled back,
Yeah.
and these things are always going to be in tension with each other. And
Yeah.
maybe that's a connection too with some of the things like the like who you interviewed, Ian McGilchrist, his work on left brain right brain stuff, which I've only
Yeah.
just scratched the surface of. But his sense about how seemingly it seems to me that the rational faculty, it doesn't make any sense to be against the rational part of the brain. Yeah.
Right.
You obviously it's an essential part of life and being a person. But if you forget that there's anything outside of that, then you're losing something,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you're losing that natural tension,
Yep.
which kind of almost triangulates towards a meaning,
Yeah.
triangulates towards a reality. The reality is not just the abstract understanding of something. And everybody kind of knows that in some
Right.
sense. Just
Yeah.
like the reality is not just like the dirt under your feet, you know, and the feeling of it or something.
Yeah.
There's the higher registers and the lower registers,
Yeah.
and um, we have to get outside this idea that like figuring out which register is yours. Like
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
one
We
do you
gotta
believe is
and
the real register?
and stay there the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't make,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not a good idea. It's not gonna,
No.
that's not a way of looking at reality that's going to yield fruit. It's not going to
Yeah.
yield any kind of sense of,
Yeah.
you're not going to get closer to reality that way.
Yeah.
You're going to get further away
And
from.
totally. And arguably at this moment, we're seeing certain branches of religion, and maybe even certain ancient branches of religion, um, um, imploding because they are not corresponding to human experience. That increasingly there's nothing to grasp if you're not ideologically committed to them. There's nothing to grasp onto, um, and uh, and so I'm what I say that to say, I'm not just saying that the wildest versions of self creation are doomed to fizzle out, so we don't have to worry about them. I'm also saying, um, you know, expressions of Christianity and some of the ancient religions, I believe, can be on their way to um, not serving anything anymore, because those particular parts have become untethered from humanity and from what human experience is. I mean, it's slower because they do have that continuity,
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so and they can do some real damage on the way out because of ideological possession. People flailing, and yeah, doing damage as their ideology dies. But
I guess, yeah. I think maybe at the end of the day, when all these things, as all these things are playing out, why the Christian message or the basic gospel message appeals to me in the midst of all that is that it's centered on love at its core.
yeah,
And I think that's the kind of thing that's ultimately, I mean, basically what I'm trying to do in my life and looking for in my life is to locate the that core of love that's there and kind of burning, and then to try to find its correspondence out in the wider world. I
yeah,
think that's kind of the guiding principle.
yeah.
That's kind of what I find in George MacDonald a lot of the time.
Oh man, yeah. I was having McDonald imagery as you were even saying that. That fire,
Well,
those the rose fire.
yeah,
And yeah, in Lilith. Anyway, sorry, keep
I
going.
haven't read Lilith. That should be the
Okay.
next one that I read, but it's in Fantastes, and it's in a lot, some of the shortest, the Golden Key or whatever it was, that I've read. And there's a part of Fantastes where he keeps going out of doors and having these experiences and forgetting his self-awareness and getting caught up in the experiences, and he gets kicked back into this room where the fire is burning, and the kind of archetypal grandmother figure is tending the fire and taking care of him when he's kind of
Mm,
recovering from the experiences outside
yeah.
this little hut.
Yeah.
And that's what is so valuable about McDonald. It's not his prose, and it's not even very explicit, but just this feeling of that he obviously was trying to convey about there being a center, and the center is something to do with love, and there really being such a place as home, there really being such a place as a this there really being such a thing as this like inner flame burning, and it really does correspond to something outside of
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
That has to me, to me that's the only thing worth believing.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that's the only. To me, that's the only good starting point, because if that's not true, I don't even want to.
Right.
I don't even want to participate in that truth.
Yeah.
I would rather participate in the untruth of that. I would
Well,
rather participate in that illusion than
yeah.
than uh, than accept a world that didn't have that at its core.
Right. Yeah. You could create that at least in your own life in some small way. You'd want to create it even if it isn't the macro. And I think to
Yeah.
carry on, like what you might find in Lilith, is also the sense that I think is at the heart of Christianity, that is redemption and restoration is not only the ultimate justice, but it's something that we naturally understand is the ideal. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
we know, if you really think about it, that whatever justice can be, meted out or whatever in this world, is not true justice, and we know that true justice is restoration, it's resurrection, it's redemption,
Right.
it's healing, and that's why this idea of heaven never dies, because in a sense, or the promised land or something, because we know that all of this, well, we just know that other country is real, uh, regardless of whether we ever see it, and we know that living as though it's real, living as though redemption is possible, it
Well,
is
living as though it's
strong.
real, living as though it's real does it is. it has creative powers in it on its own. Living as though it's real makes something that it's something I would say better out of something that was there before and didn't have it. So there's some almost essential truth to it. It's like, the whole Tolkien and Lewis discussion about the true myth, Christianity
Right.
being the true myth, and Tolkien kind of letting Lewis in on this idea of like, you love the Norse mythologies and Greek mythologies, and you love them, and you know, but you're critical of the Christian one because of because of how close it is to the culture, whatever. You have a certain, but he saw the Christian myth as being the part where myth and reality actually intersected. And you could either believe that or not believe that, but it's an interesting notion of it is a way of understanding. It's a way of seeing how both sides of I don't know. It's a way of seeing how two parts of oneself can be combined and can be creative
Yeah.
and its powers. And I mean, that's, in a sense, to me, that's good. That's good enough.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
it's more than that, it's more than that. If it's not more than that, it's still
Yeah.
the best thing going, in a sense.
Yeah. Your life was better for that. Yeah. Well, it's getting late here, and
Yeah.
I think there was we got to some good places there, and I just, I mean, one of the reasons I like you is I feel like there's always more to talk about, and when I watch your podcasts and listen to your podcast, I both, I'm interested in the guest and interested in hearing more from you as well, because I feel like there's a lot of depth there. So hopefully we can talk again at some point. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I'd
yeah,
be happy to do that. I appreciate the invitation to talk, and I'm glad we finally got to do it. And like I
totally.
said, these are the kinds of things I like doing. I like talking about any chance that I can. So it's great. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed sharing a drink and just
Oh man, I
having a
wish I
bit
had more whiskey. I'm gonna have to.
of it's over. That's when the conversation is done.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Say hi to your lovely family from me, who they do not know,
Right.
and yeah, I'll let you know when this is up on the internet.
Great. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Aaron.
Thank you.
Anytime. Yep.
Yeah.